All right, so for this one, you're getting this piece of footage, which of course doesn't want to play. All right, we'll just use QuickTime then. So open with QuickTime. And this is me with my GoPro at Meyer, just kind of walking down the aisle. And what we want to do is we want to add stuff to this scene. So I'm just going to shrink this, hit play. And this is playing back at double speed because it's like 60 frames a second, so it plays it back like super quick. I actually wasn't like running this fast down the aisle. Okay, so this is our original footage. Now the idea with this is that we want to, if you've seen something like Google Glass or enhanced VR stuff, basically we want to create an environment where we're wearing some sort of apparatus that will basically pick up on certain items inside that aisle and help us do our shopping. So with this one, I'm going to open this at QuickTime. We're going to add some items to it. Now it's not simply a matter of dragging stuff and putting it on top and then making it look like it's in perspective. Like if this was Photoshop, we could just use the free transform and lock it in and be good. But because this is moving, this has to move with the camera also. So now when I hit play, you'll see that these items are actually like locked into those areas, right? So this kind of thing is used all over the place. So if this was our enhanced VR type stuff where, you know, this helps us do our shopping because it says, hey, here's the item you wanted, it's on sale, there you go. And it's also moving obviously with the camera, so that's the point of this. If you can do this kind of stuff, this process is used like all over the place. Anything you see where they're holding a screen and they're moving the screen around, that's all the same kind of process. It's just a matter of doing it in a different way. And then just to show you real quick, this demo 2520, I think. Nope, 25. This one. So this one right here is this same thing. Oops, I went too far. So this one is green screen removal. So this was a green screen on the screen that the guy was holding, and then his finger was on top of it. So you have green screen removal to pull the color off of it so it's transparent. And then you have tracking to make sure that this item stays locked in. So in this case, you're using the tracking from this assignment plus the green screen from the other thing I just showed in the same kind of context. I did it again. Right, Minority Report, where he's doing all that, yeah. And then this one here, this is no green screening, this is all just like created interface. So she was there just doing this with her hands moving around, and then everything that she is actually moving has just been an interface that gets created. This was done in a program called Nuke, but it definitely could be done outside of After Effects also. Just Nuke is better for this kind of stuff. Boop. Okay, so let's get into After Effects to see how we would do this. So I'm going to import my footage. Like I said, I'm going to give you this tracking movies. I'm going to give you this serial movie. It's already on the server, so you can download it when you're ready. And then you'll see that it comes in at 60 frames per second, 59.94 frames per second. That's like way too quick, so we want to actually slow this thing down. So I'm going to right-click, interpret the footage, main, and I'm going to tell it to do it at 30 frames a second. Okay, so now that it's 30, when I drop this down onto my comp, it'll actually go at the correct speed. This is the speed that I was actually walking. Okay, turn off full screen. There we go. All right, so the biggest thing here is that we're using this track camera, okay? So now my original piece of footage didn't look like this. If you've ever shot with a GoPro, you get this really big like fisheye lens thing where the center of it is huge and then the sides of it are typically like, seem like they're squished just because of how much data they're kind of fitting in there. Just so you can see the actual footage. This one. It doesn't matter which one. It's the same kind of thing. So if you look here, this is the chip aisle. You can see how like rounded this feels, where the sides are like, you know, stretched out, not squished, stretched out. So before I gave this to you, I did a couple things on it, just so you can see it, because everyone, if you ever get into video stuff, like GoPros are super fun. You can attach them pretty much anywhere. I've attached them like outside my car and driven down the street. It's awesome. Drop this here. There we go. So when you get a piece of footage like this and you want to track it and put another piece of footage on top of it, it doesn't do good to take a square box and try to put it here, because that's actually like distorted. It's actually like rounding it. So under the effect, under distortion, there's one called optics compensation. And this effect is specifically designed to take the distortion out of images. So if I go to this, I looked it up, and this, if you aren't familiar with the GoPro, it's like a fixed lens on there. There's no zooming in and out. It's just a fixed size. So pretty much any GoPro you use is going to be very similar in what distortion you get. So they said 75 was the optimal number, and then you just reverse it. So now this is basically taking the distortion off of that. So if you see it before or after, you can see the distortion going away. Now the idea with this is if you wanted to keep that distortion, you would undistort it, do all your stuff to it, and then at the end, you put the distortion back on, and then it looks like everything is like locked into it. But for this, I really didn't want the distortion. I like it without that distortion. Okay, so then I just rendered this out as a movie so that you guys could use it. All right, so I'm going to delete this stuff here. I don't need that. I'm going to go to my serial box. I'm going to close this thing. There we go. All right, so I'm going to go to track my camera. So under animation, there's a track camera. And if you just let it go at the default settings, it's going to fail, okay? There's so much stuff happening inside here that it just is going to fail, all right? We have to set some stuff up. Now, to give you an idea of what it's doing, it's actually going through and following every single item inside here. So, like what it does is it looks for contrast. So you see where like the sea and the background of this are contrasted. There's one's purple and one's white. So it puts a little marker here, and it goes frame by frame, and it follows that contrast every frame. Now it does it across the entire image. So any spot that there's contrast, you're going to get this thing happening. So where the 10 is up here, there's going to be a tracking marker. Where this C is, where this C is, where this one is, there's going to be a tracking marker. Where the heart is, where the Cheerios are, where these things are, like pretty much over the entire screen, there's going to be these tracking markers, and it finds it. Now the reason it fails is because it doesn't do a good job of isolating ones that it doesn't need to track or shouldn't be tracking. So areas it shouldn't track are the ground. The ground is reflective, so these lights that are there are actually moving. You don't want to track something that's moving. What you want to do is track items that are stable in here, right? So if I'm tracking me walking down the street and there's a crowd of people, it's going to fail because it just doesn't know what is supposed to be moving and what's supposed to be stationary, okay? So things like the lights, it's going to say, I don't know what that's going to do, and it just fails. So I'm going to go into the Advanced tab, and I'm going to make sure that this is set to a typical solve, and then say the detailed analysis. And this is going to start the process over again, and what it's going to do is eliminate all the stuff that it assumes is moving. You can tweak it afterwards, but just by doing these two things, most of your solves will be accurate if it can be solved. After Effects does a crappy job of solving cameras that are tricky, okay? There's better tools out there. Mocha is another tool that you can use to track stuff. PF Track is another one. Buju is another one. There's several other ones like inside Nuke and inside of other programs that will also do tracking that are much more involved, much more advanced. This one, because it's right inside the software, because I know it works with this, we're using it. If I had a shot that I needed for a movie and I needed to make sure it's dead set locked on, I'd probably go to another tool that's a bit more accurate. But for what we're doing, it's perfect. So if you look at the top here, it says time remaining and then frames. So you can see how many frames it's doing. The more frames you have, obviously, the longer it's going to take. So you wouldn't want to do like 25 minutes of footage. You really want to just isolate the area you want to track and get that in there. There are times too, if you're tracking, that you may need to actually do like a manual track where you're animating your camera manually. That way it's like not easier, but sometimes it's like the only way to do it. I read a lot of like behind the scenes movie stuff. I'm trying to think of what it was. Hellboy, I think. In Hellboy, there was like 30 frames of a shot that they needed tracking. And basically the entire thing was a big blur because it was this guy jumping out of a window and landing here. You can't track it if it's too blurry. So the guy had to manually go through and move the camera at each single frame to get it lined up with what the camera is supposed to be doing. The idea with this is that we get a camera at the end of it that moves the same way that I moved when I shot it. That's the goal. So if we can create digitally a camera that did the same move, then we should be able to put elements in here and have the elements move along with that same thing. There are tools too. There's robotic machines that hold cameras that can actually move, and then that information is automatically fed to the computer and it automatically tracks. Not always the case. Those systems are really expensive, and it's usually cheaper to have someone go through and do this than to try to have to set up this huge rig that is perfectly locked in. So if you see, we're at about 72% or so. Also, this has a fixed angle of view. If I were to zoom in and out, that would change things of how it's perceiving it. So I definitely want to make sure when I shot this, I want to make sure it was as simple as possible. Even when I was walking down the aisles trying to figure out which aisle I wanted to do, if it was a chip aisle, forget it, because every bag is reflective. So it's a lot of reflection on there, it wouldn't work. There is some reflection on these, but it's not enough to pull some bad data. I went down to the deli aisle, or the frozen food aisle, same thing. All those windows, incredibly difficult. With other software, you can isolate and say, I want to just track these areas, and it'll track just those areas. After Effects doesn't have that capability. All right. So what it's going to do first is it's going to solve or track all the stuff. So what it's doing now is tracking. This is step one. After it tracks and it figures out where all these points are moving, then it goes through and tries to calculate how are these tracks moving and then create a camera. So that's what this is doing, solving the camera. So this doesn't take as long. What we should get at the end of this is dots like all over the place. And if these dots move with our camera, then it's a successful solve. If it doesn't move with the camera, then we've done something wrong. And just so you're aware of this, it doesn't always work. Like even this piece of footage, half the class may start it up and do this exact assignment exactly the way I said it, and it may fail, and we just have to reboot After Effects and do it again, and sometimes it'll work. It's just kind of finicky in how it does some of that stuff. I've tracked this probably 5 times already just to verify that I'm getting a solve every time. So hopefully we won't have that issue, but just so you're aware, it could have that issue. So wait a minute. We could also render track points too. I don't know if you've ever seen any videos where people show the track points. There are people who their job is just to track, and so they want to show how good the track is. It doesn't really matter for us. You could use this for replacement too. So if you wanted to, let's say the Cheerios you didn't like in your video and you wanted to make them something else, you want to make them Frosted Flakes, you could take a picture of Frosted Flakes and put it where the Cheerios are, and now the Frosted Flakes will kind of look like where the Cheerios are. It takes a lot more work to actually make it look perfect, but you could do that. This is used a lot too in shows. Like if you watch any, there was a series I watched of this guy, and his job was to basically erase and add stuff into shows. Like you've heard of Survivor, right? So Survivor came out every week. They would film it on these days. This guy would get the footage, and then he would have like 4 days to go through and erase all the stuff that they didn't want in the scene. Like in one scene, they had a snake, and the snake was tied to this pole, and he had to go through and erase out the rope. So he would track where the snake is at, and then basically create patches to cover up where the rope was at. And he would do this like that was his job, is just doing this stuff. All right. So this is done. So now if I were to click and drag, you'll see nothing has changed here. But if I click on my camera tracker now, you'll see that as I move my mouse over this, I'm getting these bullseyes. It's hard to see, but there's tiny dots there. I'm going to go over here to my track point and make this bigger. Or my target size. Why it's not showing it. I'll just zoom in so you can see it. You can see these little things here. So what these are all those tracking points that it figured out that's where things are at. If you see a red one, that's one that it's kind of like iffy. Like I don't know if that's a good track. If you see a yellowish one, like this one's kind of yellowy, that's kind of like in the middle, and then green is like this is a good track. So it pretty much knows this is a good one. Now every time I hover between 3 of them, it puts the bullseye on there, and the bullseye says I'm going to use these 3 points to create an item in that spot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and find something that looks like it matches the perspective. If I go to a point like this, that doesn't look like it's matching the perspective of that wall, right? It looks like it's kind of like leaning out from it. So what I want to do is find one like that, or I think I saw a better one right here. That one looks better. So I'm going to right click right here, and I'm going to say create text and camera. Okay? Now you can do this 1,000 times if you want. There's like a million things there. You can do it 1,000 times. So this creates a text item and it creates a camera. So I'm going to go to my text and scale it down because usually it's like way too big. And you'll notice that it's not perfect. They're never going to be perfect right out of the bat. It's like on an angle here. I need to rotate it, so I can go to my rotate and I can rotate it. Now the rotates are going to be kind of funky too, so you just have to, play with all of them until you get a happy result. Cool. So what should happen now is I rewound it, my text is gone. When I hit the play button, oops, I'm going to take this down to like 1/3 so it goes quicker. When I hit the play button, what we should see is my text sitting in that spot. Okay, so what we're looking for is to make sure that it's not floating. Like sometimes you'll see the text is like in one spot and the background is moving differently than the text. What it should look like is that the text is actually in line with all those items, and that's what it's looking like. Cool. So that worked, okay? So just to give like a quick 2-second thing of what we did, we went to this and we changed the interpolation so that we have 30 frames a second. We dropped it onto a new comp. We went up to animation and told it to track the camera. We told it to be typical. We told it to do a detailed analysis. And then that gave us the result so that we can right click and then create a text and camera. Now every time we want to create a new one, we have to make sure we click on the camera, click on the tracker, and then we can create new targets. So anything you want to create a target for, you can do that. So I can go to here and create a text there. And then I can go to scale and scale it down. There we go. And now I have 2 pieces of text that are just sitting there. And you can see that they match up. This one's leaning back a little bit more, so I probably need to rotate it forward a bit. There we go. Okay. Now just so you can see this too, I'm going to go to 2 views. And then in this view, I want to see the camera. So if I zoom out, there it is. You can see the camera that's over here that it created. And it's moving in a very similar fashion to how I moved when I was videotaping this. I went, I turned. You can see it turning. I went this way. And then you'll see it turn right at the end. Okay, that's pretty much how I shot this. If you see the camera going like crazy and you didn't go crazy when you videotaped it, something's wrong. All right. So now the next part of this is how to get all the items in there. This is the new part. That stuff there that we just did, that's the new part. Everything after this is all stuff we've done. Okay. So I'm going to create an item right here where that thing is. So I'm going to create a new, oops, click down here. I'm going to create a new solid. Okay. Now what I want is this solid to be in the exact same spot as what I just created, like right where the text is. So if I go to the text and I hit P for position, you'll see that the position of this has like crazy numbers in it. We don't care what the numbers are, we just know they're crazy and we want to put our item in that spot. So I'm going to hit Control C on the position, go to my solid, make sure it's a 3D item like that, and then go to the position and paste it. Oops, I think I copied it. There we go. All right, so I can get rid of this text. I don't need that text there. So now you'll see that this card is now fitting right where that's at. Okay, so then I can go through rotate and I can, rotate it like that. Try to match that angle. This is where it gets funky because there's so many different ways to rotate this to get it lined up. It may take a minute to do that. And then you could also use your orientation to help with that too. Sometimes it's easier to do that like that. That's pretty close. All right, so that's good enough for what we're doing. All right, so all this does is give me a placeholder. It gives me a, this is about where I want to create something. So I'm gonna right click and pre-compose this, and I'm gonna say leave all the attributes here. This is gonna be just like an outline. Okay, by leaving the attributes there, all that 3D data stays in this composition. When I double click the comp, it takes me into this, which is basically just that screen. So what I can do now is anything I put here will automatically show up there. So if I go to my text and I just type in, hello mom, and then I go back to my serial, you'll see that it says hello mom right there. Okay, and it's all locked in. So this is basically an asset. This item here could be a movie, it could be a 1,000-layer composition, it could be my Angry Birds animation, it could be my entire demo reel, whatever it is. I can go to Best Buy and videotape TVs and then put my demo reel on all the TVs or whatever I want to do. Okay, it's the same concept. It's just that item now is just an asset. It's just a flattened out asset that we can move into 3D and put it where we want it. Okay, so let me delete this because I want to do this a specific way. Okay, I want to do some planning on this as to what I want to show. So my previous one, I wanted to show like the Cheerios were heart healthy. I want you to have 3 items inside here that are tracked. So you have 3 different pieces or 3 different areas you've added something to this. So for mine, I went through here and here. Now they're big. I don't know why they weren't big before. Oh, these are big and those are small. That's weird. Whatever. So I'm going to go, yeah, see, and these ones aren't even like, I guess they're huge now. That's really weird. So I'm going to go to where I see the Cheerios, like this. And I'm going to try to find a good spot, again, kind of matches the perspective. I'm going to right click and create a solid, okay? Now you could also create a null. Watch the difference in where the solid gets created and where the null gets created. So I create a null. Here is the null, and I'll scale it up so we can see it. And then here's the solid. Look at where the center point of each one is. The null creates the point right where I clicked. The solid, the center of that is where I clicked. Okay? So that'll be important if you ever want to match something up. Like if you wanted to, on my sign example, nope. Desktop, here, tracking, movies. That's not the right one. Close, this one. What's going on, VLC? So on this one, my sign actually rotates towards the camera. Just because if this is like a VR type thing, like this sign here is facing basically along the direction of the aisle. And as I get closer, it rotates to line up with my viewpoint so I can see it still. So that's where you may want to use a null to lock in, like this is where I want to rotate from. And when you use a solid, this is where I want the center of this to be. Okay? So I'm going to go and rotate this and just kind of line it up a bit better. And like I said, this part is going to be a little bit tricky just because of the angles and stuff. It's pretty good. I just need to lean it back a little bit more. Like that, maybe. There we go. All right. So now I'm going to right click. I'm going to pre-compose. I'm going to call this Cheerios. I'm going to leave all my attributes, hit OK. And now I can just double click this and then change stuff. Now what would be great is if I could see those changes as I'm working. So under View, you can go to, every time I forget where it is, View, first 3D viewer, yeah, New Viewer, there it is. It's just grayed out. So you go to View, New Viewer, and it pops open a new viewer. That's why this window keeps popping up over here. So what I can do is I can switch back to my serial, and I can lock this here. Okay, so now my serial is locked. And then on this Cheerios one, this is what I want to load there. So I'm just going to double click my Cheerios and just move this over to that window. There we All right, so now my Cheerios are here. This is my composition. So what I want to do is do what I want it to look like here, and then I can see what it's supposed to look like over there. Like I know this has probably got to be bigger. So I'm going to go back to my cereal. I'm going to hit the S key, make this bigger. That should be good. Go back to my Cheerios, and then change this. So I'm just going to turn it off because I don't need to see it. And I'm just going to make a shape. So if I make this green box, you'll see the green box lines up right there. And then if I go to my move tool and I just kind of resize this a bit, add a stroke to it. There we go. So now we can see that. Inside of this shape, I can go to my contents, rectangle, oh, no fill, sorry. And then take the opacity down some. There we go. Take the stroke down too. That stroke is like way too thick now. So like 20. Also my line cap and line join, I like to have those rounded so that if I do have any edges here, they'll be rounded. Also, there's a roundness feature that's right here. So I could crank this up and round off these corners just so it looks a little bit nicer, and maybe shrink the size of this down just a bit. There we go. That's much better. Okay. So now I can just put some text inside here. So if I just go to my text tool and just type in here, and shrink this down. There we go. Cool. So that's what it's going to look like. And I could animate this on, or I can keep it just the way it is. So now if I were just to rewind this and play it, you'll see that it just says locked in right there. Sweet. Okay. So now I can do that for another item. So one of the things I want to do is focus in on one specific item, which is what I did with the checks box. So right here, I wanted to focus in on, here's that checks you were looking for. This was on your shopping list, and it's on sale for $2.50. Okay, so I wanted to isolate an item like that. So I'm going to do that too. So I just delete that. I don't need this tracking null. That was just extra. I don't need this text. All right. So I think this is, yep, that's good. So I'm going to go to my serial. I'm going to go to my camera. I'm going to go to where the checks box is really obvious. And I'm just going to create the center one. I'm just going to create a solid for this one. And I'm going to go through the same process. I'm going to grab the solid. I'm going to go to rotate and just line it up with my view. It's not too bad. You want to preview it at different angles. So as the camera's moving, you want to make sure it still stays like it's lined up, because you don't want it to be like that, because that looks so weird. Okay, so now that it's there, I right-click, I pre-compose. I call this race checks. Leaving the attributes, hitting OK, double-clicking it. And now I want to outline one of my checks boxes. So I'm going to go to where I can see the checks box better. I'm going to turn this off, and I'm just going to create this outline. And here is exactly, you know, lining this up is just a matter of moving it. It's not interactive, so I can't like line it up and then see what it's doing right away. I have to kind of move it and let go. It may help to hit the transparency on it, just so you can see it better. That should be good. I may need to rotate it a little bit too. It looks like it might be just a hair rotated off. That's no big deal. I can do that after. Okay, so I'm just kind of like lining this up with the outside of the box. Okay, and this process is a bit forgiving. Imagining that this is like realistic tech that someone is wearing. It's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be like a movie where it's locked in. There's going to be a little bit of wiggle, but the idea is we're getting the overall idea across. All right, so I'm going to take the fill off of this, and I'm going to go to my stroke, and right here, and I'm going to add in dashes. And if I make the dashes bigger, You see, I get like the coupon lines, maybe like 50. Nope. 40. That should be good. And then if we look at the offset of this, this is how I animated it, just by changing this offset. I could also change these. This is really apparent if you look at this. Like if I change the caps to rounded, it rounds those off, which looks nice. And then same thing here. Not that we're going to see that one, but I just always do both of them. So I'm just going to go to the beginning and set an offset, go to the end, and then crank this up to like 1,000 or something. There you go. Now I want to make sure it's visible in the final footage. And you can definitely see it's off. Like this angle is definitely not there. So let me just rotate this back. Oops. And I'm always jumping back to that original serial comp to rotate things back to where they need to be. Like, that looks pretty good. It definitely looks like it's lined up a bit better. It could be a little bit in the Z direction. There you go. All right, so I'll go back to the race checks. Now I don't want this to always be there because I want it to be like, as we spun around, my technology picked up that the race checks are there and then it highlights it, right? So that's what I want to do. So I'm going to use what we've used before, which is the trim path. We've used this like, not on the very first assignment, but like, or actually we did on the first assignment. On the page transitions, I showed that. So I'm going to just animate this. Now one thing that I don't always like is where it puts the start point of this. Like it put it like in this top corner. I don't like that. So I'm going to use offset to change that position to there. There we go. So I'm going to go here and watch where the camera turns around, like probably right about there. I'm going to hit end keyframe, crank this up to 100. And so now as we've spun around, we should get this thing outlining it. And you'll see it's a little bit off. That's no big deal, okay? I'm not concerned with you getting it exactly on. The idea is we have the concept and we have the understanding of how this is working. All right, so we have this that outlines it. The next thing I want to do is have a little bubble pop up that says it's on sale or whatever. So I already know the placement of this, so I'm actually going to just use that same item. So I'm going to duplicate my race checks marker here, and I want to rotate this basically like where the corner of it, I want to pull it out. So I'm going to jump back to my serial, I'm going to jump back to my camera tracker, I'm going to put a dot right here, a null right there. Okay, so I have a little null guy right there. And I'm going to parent this race checks, the top one, to that tracker. So now if I go to that null and I rotate it, you can see how it rotates right from that corner. Then I just have to adjust to get the lineup correct. And this is, like I said, where it can be a horrible process. It doesn't always line up perfectly the way you want it to. Just rotate in the X. That's all I need you to do. There we go. That's better. All right. And then, of course, we want to check it out and make sure it's still there. Yep, that should be good. Okay. So I don't obviously want to use the same race checks. I use that as my placeholder for it. I'm going to go to my project. I'm going to duplicate this one. And then I'm just going to hold down Alt and replace this one with the other one. Okay? So by duplicating it, I created basically the same setup, but in a new composition. Okay? And then if I double click this one, I can just erase all the stuff that's in it. And then replace it with whatever I want. So I'll just drag a box here just so we can see what's happening. I'll take my fill to green. There it is. Okay? Now it doesn't look like it's lined up in a good spot. Like it looks weird where it's at. Because it looks like it's like sticking off to the side of it. Right? So I think I need to go back to my serial comp and maybe just move it. And maybe even move it up some. There we go. It still looks like it's kind of like weird where it's at. See, and I went too far with that. Let me grab the X. Y. There we go. So now it feels like it's sitting right next to it. Okay, so now just like before, whatever I do to that box, whatever I do to that comp will just trickle right into this. So I go here and I create whatever I want. For this one, I did the same or similar thing. I went to my path, I rounded this off. Maybe not so round like that. I went to my stroke. I lowered the stroke a bit. I went to the fill, I knocked the opacity down so we can still see through it. I gave it a different color because looking at what the interface is showing us, I would imagine the green stuff would be like recommendations, like this is a good food for you. If I had a red one, that would be this is bad food for you. But the blue one is like this is stuff you actually wanted on your list. So that way as I'm spinning around, I can see there's a blue item, that's the item I wanted from my list. So now I can go to my text. I'm not going to type the whole thing here, but you know, just this is my text, whatever. Okay. You'll notice here too that it's actually backwards. Oopsie. That this item came out backwards, so I can go to my rice checks, or my cereal. I don't know what I did there. Workspace, reset. There we go. And then back to my new viewer. New viewer, there we go. All right. I'm not sure what happened with that. Okay, so anyway, my text is backwards here. So obviously I need to flip that. So if I go to my rice checks 2, and all I have to do is just make the scales of this negative in like the X direction. There we go. So I just make it negative 100 there, and then we're good to go. All right, so this is my text sale item. And then for the animation on this one, I did another trim path. And I did the same thing. You know, I didn't want this to come out of here. I wanted it to come out of this corner. Like this is the item it found and it went out. So I just used that offset. So right there is the start of it. So I'm just going to move this around until we get to that. There we go. Now, this is where it gets a little bit different than what we've done before. So I'm going to wait for this box to fill in. There we go. So this box filled in. Then I'm going to animate the start and the offset. I'm going to go up a little bit, like there should be good. I'm going to take the start down to 0, and I'm going to take the offset back to 0 also. And then you can watch how this thing animates out. You can see how it comes from that center, okay? As opposed to before, if I didn't animate the offset. Let me go back to where this was. It animates like that, which looks kind of weird. I like animating like this, where it comes out from that side. So I think that's kind of neat how it does that. And then this should actually be probably at 100 at the beginning, so it's gone. There we go. Alright, that's cool. And then I did some other stuff too, just so you can see. There is like a little design inside here. So I duplicated this layer. I went to Effect. I went to Noise. Or Generate. That's where I went to Generate. And then there's a bunch of stuff in here you could use for that. Like one of them is Fractal, which is kind of a neat pattern. There's also Grid. I think the one I used on that was Crystal or Cell Pattern. But just so you can see, here's a grid. I could say that I want my blending mode to be Stencil Alpha. which means like lock it into where this shape is at. I just need to take my opacity back up. Well, that should have worked. Normal. There he is. So then I could take this thing. I'm not sure why it's that color. Oh, because that's my fill color. There we go. So I can change this to whatever color I want. And then I could just take this and drop it on top of the other one. So I just change my mode to like multiply. There it is. And then make sure this is a darker color. Oh, that's what I did. Somehow I moved my composition over. There we go. Alright, then I could take my... instead of this corner point, I can do the width slider, and then control how many of these are there. Or I can do width and height. Just to kind of create something that looks a little bit digital. It's not just like a flat sign. It actually looks like it has some sort of design to it. Go crazy there. And offset this a little bit here. Oops, like that. And then I could adjust the opacity of this. There we go. So now you'll see that the end sign looks like it has some kind of lines built into it. So it looks kind of neat in how that's created. And then of course my text has to come on too. So I would go to my text. I would go to my animators and I would animate, let's say, the scale. And I would just take the scale down to 0 and then use my start point to animate this coming on. So set a key for start, come up a little bit, pull it up to 100. Alright, so now if we jump back to serial, you'll see we have one item tracked right here, I have one item tracked there, and then I have another item tracked there. Okay, so then I would just render this out. Just like normal. Okay, so it shouldn't take you terribly too long to do it, especially if you do everything inside of there. The biggest thing is just what do you want to create and making sure it's lined up correctly. You don't want it to be, like I said before, something that looks like it's off, like just to be, you know, really ridiculous in how this is set up. Like that, obviously that doesn't look like it's tracked correctly. It looks like it's like some weird angle. And if it ever comes to it, typically I'll zero all these out. Oops. I'll just zero everything out, make sure I can see it obviously, and then just manually go through and rotate it to where you want that to be. And obviously it's a, it can be a bit tricky, but it's definitely worth it if you create something cool. And then you can see here it's hard to see from this angle, so that's where I rotated it. So I created this null that I could then go through and animate this thing rotating like that. Oops, not like that. The pivot point's off on this one, so I'd have to change my anchor point and whatever else. But you get the idea. Okay, so that's going to be the next assignment, and it should pretty much take a day to do just because of the stuff in here is just a review. The only thing that's new is that animation and then camera tracker and then just creating the other stuff. Okay, I don't need to save that. I'll show you my end one that I had serial tracking. Sure, yes. So I had this one, which is avoid, Frosted Flakes, even though they're delicious. And then doctor recommended that stuff. And then here's that one. I even had a little bar coming out too, just so it's kind of pointing to it, which made it a little bit nicer. You can also cut this. It doesn't need to be like this long. Like it goes all the way to like 20 some seconds. You could cut it right about 14. That should be good enough time to see what's going on. You could also create, like on the other one that I did, here and there. Yeah, whatever. Let me find my serial movie, reload footage. There you go. So on this one, I added like a little, this doesn't move. There's not track to it. It's just kind of like a display. Like you're at Meyer Hall Road, you're in aisle 10 breakfast, and then you're looking for cereal rice checks. And then that thing would come up. Okay? Yeah. All right, so that's another thing you could add to this too, just to kind of make it a little bit more interesting. You could also add little sound effects. This kind of stuff is really where like motion graphics is eventually going to be heading, because user interfaces and designs are going to be like all over the place. Like your car dash windshield will have like all this stuff all over it. This will be like no big deal to your kids and your grandkids. Like, how did you even get by without this stuff? All right. So that's the next assignment. We have Monday of next week that we're working on stuff. Wednesday of next week we have our final. Our final is going to be, here's a project, do it, and then you'll have the whole class to do that project. Okay? Everything is due on the 10th of December. All right? So we're down to the wire. Last couple of days, we just got to push, and then we'll be done. We'll have a nice little break. Any questions?